Participants see our videos. Yeah, they can. You can see. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the UN in Sri Lanka and the UN Development Programme, UNDP, and the UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, we are delighted to welcome you. This is one of a series of webinars planned by the UN in Sri Lanka in collaboration with UN agencies, partners from the private sector to support Sri Lankan SMEs in an environment of acute challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's webinar, tailored for Sri Lankan SMEs, is titled Pivoting in Pivotal Moments, using data to understand dynamic global situations and repositioning businesses, delivered by our knowledge partner Stax. Stax is a leading management consulting firm in Sri Lanka with its headquarters in the US. Stax Colombo office overlooks the Asia-Pacific region. For over 20 years, Stax has been advising large corporates to SMEs in Sri Lanka and all over the globe. Stax's stated aim is to inspire companies to dream big, think outside the box, and complement gut-based decisions with fact-based research. We are pleased to have today three senior consultants from Stax, Mr. Sean Silva, Ms. Sandamali Vijayaratna, and Mr. Tivanka Bandara, to deliver today's SME support webinar. The webinar will be moderated by Mr. Rashid Riza from the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. Without further ado, let me hand over the reins to Stax. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you kindly, Azam, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on a very important subject and also very timely moment in our history of being in such a unfathomable state of affairs, and we are very proud to be able to work with the United Nations on this type of information sharing webinars, and we hope that our audience will also find this very useful. So as Azam very kindly pointed out about what we'll be talking today is about pivoting in pivotal moments, particularly about using data. So I'd like to first start off by just showing you a little bit of a snapshot of how things were just a few years ago. If you see that innovation during times of crisis, especially over the last 20 years, we've seen that during moments of great financial distress, as in 2008, 2009, there were a number of brands that emerged, such as Uber, WhatsApp, Venmo, and Groupon, etc. All these started out as just being regular SMEs, and soon they went on a huge worldwide domination almost. And it all came in as a result of the crisis that they faced at that time. So that opportunity, they turned that opportunity into a global business. And some of the legacy brands, such as Domino's, Hyundai, had also been able to thrive in these situations because they were ready for it with their supply chain and their ability for the last mile delivery when it comes to Amazon and Domino's in particular. And Netflix started it way in advance about online streaming, which now is becoming extremely popular because of movie theaters being closed. So Disney Plus is also one that has been quite predominant in the news and is doing quite well. And I'm sure many of you, maybe beyond for 4 or 5 months ago, would have never heard of Zoom. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar company. So all this shows that we are not in a state of complete downfall. There is innovation out there. It's just how we first take the first steps. And as we all know, that is always the most difficult for most companies, SMEs, or even corporates. So I'd just like to share with you a small quote that Peter F. Drucker, the godfather of management, as he's known as, and this is quite pertinent in these times. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. All the companies I described, Uber and Netflix, never used yesterday's knowledge in order to think of new businesses. They always looked forward. So if Netflix looked at past businesses, they were thought of Blockbuster. They were seeing how Blockbuster was operating and seeing how can I make that better. But they just went on a completely different tangent and came up with a business that has completely wiped off companies like Blockbuster or any others like them around the world, which has given birth to Disney Plus and many others. So that is the law. This I believe this quote can be very useful for anyone when they think of going into international markets or going to new areas of business. So what about your company? Now, I just like to do a quick poll on whether your company has looked at foreign markets. And I think the poll will be shared on your screen right now. So if you don't mind answering this one, and then just give us an idea of our audience and their thought process. Okay, I think everyone should have voted by now. So I'll move on to the next slide. So breaking into an international market. Now, this, I think everyone can relate to this, that it is an extremely daunting task in today's day and age. And with strict rules and regulations that has come out as a result of the COVID virus, it couldn't have gotten any easier over the past few months. And we all have that ambition to go international. Our government says it. Even if you go to most corporates or SMEs, they all say, in order to get a new line of revenue, it is very important for us to go international. At the same time, it is always very difficult to take that first step. And because we don't know quite where to start. And when we do try and start, we use, maybe, again, yes, there's logic. Maybe someone else has gone into a particular country and they have done not so badly with their product. Maybe we should go in as well. But that might not be the right way to go about it, because if a logistic company goes into let's say a country like Myanmar, does not mean that a company that is doing FMCG goods should go the same and expect the same level of success. So you need that data and you need that information to see how it'll best work for you. So most people do this guiding almost in the dark, saying, I think we're on the right track, whereas we all must strive to go into the realistic way forward is, I know what we need to do. What should I be doing? How should I be going about doing it? And this is extremely pertinent when it comes to a company like, let's say, like Tata. I want to give this example because it was extreme. I've seen it firsthand. Now, Tata is the biggest commercial vehicle manufacturer in the world. And in Sri Lanka, they're extremely popular. But when they tried to go into Myanmar, they thought that they could do the same type of model as they did in Sri Lanka. They even went so far as to put up a factory over there. But in the end, they didn't understand the unique value proposition. So they did not know. They asked 3 questions, but unfortunately, they didn't get the right answer. So the first question was, does my product solve a problem, like the Demo Batta? The Tata, also known as the Tata Ace. Does it solve a problem? Can you sell it at a reasonable price? Is it appealing to the target market? Now, the first 2, yes, it solves a problem because the Batta is small, convenient, and can do the needful. Can it sell at a reasonable price? Yes. In Sri Lanka, when it came out, 800,000. At that time in 2007, it made 2006, 2007. It was a great price. Not anymore, unfortunately. It's a little bit on the high side. But is it appealing to your target market? In Sri Lanka, it's a resounding yes. It's a resounding yes. Everyone likes it. But in Myanmar, not so much. They don't. In Myanmar, the type of people, the culture, the nationalism does not go into those type of products. They generally go for Japanese products. So therefore, Tata was not able to make the strides they expected. So what I'm trying to say is, even though gut-based decision-making is very good, I mean, it's served well for many brands in Sri Lanka, as many as the international brands that you see. But at the same time, if you combine this with a fact-based approach, you may see much quicker results, because gut-based decision-making may have been very, very pertinent in a time where companies didn't have this much competition, consumers were not as informed. But now they are very much, things have changed quite dramatically, and everyone has to be more agile and get into markets a lot quicker and a lot more effectively and first time right. So I'll go through 4 steps. Number 1 is reflect. Before you, I always believe before you start on anything big in your life or even in your company, reflect on yourself and then see where you need to go. So I'll take you through some steps there. Second is determine, make choices. Again, should you go to every country in the world out there, or should you select certain markets? That is something I want to share with everybody, because when someone says, I want to go global, sometimes they try to go to way more companies than they need to. Then the third is research, getting into it and really deep diving in and getting the right information you need in order to make that entry. And then the fourth is embark into it, get into the actual country itself. So let me start with the first one, which is reflect. So this may look complicated, but but this is quite simple, and I'll take you through it, how it's used. So when you reflect within the company, what is known as the business model canvas is one such tool that is very, very useful, very easy to use once you get the hang of it. And it's been very applicable to a number of companies around the world have been using this. One such company is one we just explained, is Uber. Now, Uber, they first, and they knew this very well, is to first look at the value proposition. So we'll start in the middle of the canvas. So if you can see in the middle, I have highlighted what Uber, and when they first started, they saw as the value proposition. Does it solve a problem? Yes, people need reliable transportation. It's not really out there right now. And it's not convenient. Yes, of course, this is definitely solving a problem. Can you sell it at a reasonable price? Yes, because they are able to give it for much, compete with rates of normal taxis in any country. Yes, it does solve that. And it gives additional income to the taxi drivers as well, or anyone else who may be going to a certain destination who can use an additional income to take passengers along their routes. And is it appealing to the target market? And again, that's a resounding yes. So they answered every one of these questions brilliantly. And then they said, yes, this works. And this is where we will see this business that we are trying to embark on will work rather than traditional taxis. So I always encourage my clients to first start out with value proposition. What is their business? If they're starting a new business, what is the value proposition they're trying to do with a new product or service? And what is the existing one? So then I would then go to the right-hand side, which is what will bring us money. Customers are essentially what will bring money into the business. And again, let me take the Uber example, where we see that people, when you see their customer segments are basically people who need transport, car owners. So they have 2 very profitable customer segments that they identified. Then if you look at customer relationships, what kind of relationship do customers want with their companies that are selling them that service? And they came up with a great system of the rating system. So the customers can rate the drivers, and the drivers can rate the passengers as well. So both sides benefited, and this kind of relationship is very, very attractive to the base. And that's again something they really emphasized on by using the canvas. And look at things like channels. They just use the app and website, and this was the way they used to communicate their unique value proposition. So that's essentially on the side that brings us money. Let's look at the left-hand side, which is meant to show us what is actually going to cost us money, such as your key partners or your suppliers. So in the case of Uber, who they work with mainly is the payment processor when you use your credit card, and the API providers. And then when you go into the next box, which is key activities, this is basically what they do on a day-to-day basis. What does Uber do on a day-to-day basis? They always improve their platform. They introduce everything from Uber X to Uber Premium. They went into so many different types of improvements in their apps, in their support system. And this is something that has been, if you look at Uber, what it was 3-4 years ago, it's very different from the app you see today. And then how did they utilize their key resources? What helps run their business model? One is the tech platform, the network of drivers, and the brand. So these are three things they invest a lot of money in, and which again brings about great results, because that's where they see all the revenue coming in, which is you see at the bottom. So their cost structure, you can see this mainly on the tech platform. They spend it on marketing and they spend it on personnel. That's basically what they look upon. And if you look at the revenue streams, they look at percentage per ride. Everything they get a percentage of the ride. Now you may be thinking, Uber is not only a ride-hailing cab, they're also doing Uber Eats now. So they looked at their value proposition and said, hey, I can still give, now people don't have options. Is there a need for it? Does it solve a problem? Yes, it does. People don't have very limited options with the choices of food there is out there. We can get them to go to every restaurant. Can it be sold at a reasonable price? Yes, they'll charge a very minimal price for the delivery of food. And is it appealing? Yes, it is. So Uber then, when they went into Uber Eats, they used the same canvas and expanded upon it. And now they are making perhaps even more revenue from the new business than they are from the ride sharing business. And they are making, if you look at the revenue streams in that, it's not even percentage per ride, it's per percentage of the value of the order value as well. So, and it's quite significant in other countries. So this is how, by reflecting, you can have everything on one canvas, and then you can see and grow your business by using this, by looking at new business avenues while working off your unique value proposition. And this is not, like I mentioned with the Uber example, this is not something that you do it once and you're done with it. It can constantly be updated. And Uber now may have to change its entire business model canvas again, because with coronavirus, it is now affecting people from using vehicles as much as it was before. They'd rather use their own vehicle. So there is some data to suggest that we will see that people will start buying more cars. So that is yet to be seen, but that may very well be the projection. So Uber will be looking at changing their business model canvas once again. So all this needs data, and what my colleagues will be showing you is how data can be used most effectively to answer all these questions, as it is when you look at the prioritization of countries. So data in your reflection side will help you determine where you are, and if you have a new business that you're going into, where you want to go when you go into export markets. It can be used. You can use it with the same lens, saying like, if my unique value proposition in Sri Lanka is this, in international countries, it may not be the same. So you can use that same canvas while using data over here in order to prioritize which countries to go in. Now, when we've been advising our clients internationally and locally, we see that people want to go abroad, but not necessarily know which countries to go for. So we always suggest a prioritization exercise. And this can look at things from macro indicators to business indicators and representative indicators. Starting with macro, we'll see things like, we'll first look at trade agreements and import regulations. Is your product able to be imported in that country, or are they protecting local industries in particular? So I remember we looked at a certain country or a certain product to send to a certain country, it being Bangladesh actually, and we found that the government has been taking great steps to protect the local industry, even though the market was very attractive. The product was very popular amongst people over there. You can make a lot of money if you go in there, but the government has taken strict measures to make sure the local industries benefit and not importers. So the price range, because they put a huge tax on it. So that's why we always recommend look at the macro indicators first. Then once you see, and then that's when my colleagues will talk about COVID-19 response data. This is where they will give you insights into how you can use that data to make those decisions. Then we look at business indicators. Now this can be for your particular product. Is there a real market for it? Is there a target market that is growing and significant enough to bring in revenue for you? Is it easy to do business in the country? Has there high levels of corruption? Will you be able to do that effectively without giving up too much control of your business or your product? So these are the next level you need to look at once you go from macro to business. So in the macro stage, you may have, let's say you're trying to get into Africa, which is about 52 countries. By eliminating ones which don't fit into the trade agreements or the COVID response or any other indicators, you can bring that down to 20. From 20 to the represent indicators, which is particularly towards your product. So let's say you are doing cinnamon. In that country, we can see what kind of import volumes there are. I believe a couple of weeks ago, if you had attended the ITC Tools webinar, that really showed you how you can get that type of data. And you can even look at competitive intensity. Is there a lot of competition for your product in that country? If there is, you may be getting into a market where you won't be able to compete because they have learned the ropes. They have they have improved their supply chain, which may make it very costly for you to go inside and compete. So there is a market, but competitors have dominated that market. And that is sometimes very true in certain countries, such as in certain African countries in particular. And manufacturer's presence. So if a manufacturer has if there's a lot of industries, you may find that your product may not be competing very well. So example, I worked on a project where we need to send tractors into Pakistan. And when we looked at that project, it was very attractive. The market was stupendous. We had a lot of potential. Pakistan is in need of tractors. But again, they put a 20% tax on anyone who sends tractors from a foreign country. And that killed the business plan. So that is something everyone should aspire to look at. Even though there is a market, you may not be able to enter that market considering competitor intensity. So that in the sense will give you your top countries to target. So you now have your countries to target. Now once you have those countries, what do you do next? Next is, let's try and find out more about that country. Let's deep dive into it. And when it comes to countries like Europe and the US and Australia, where we have done mostly a lot of our work, you've been able to do this kind of research from even Sri Lanka without physically having to go there. And because going to these countries now is going to be more and more difficult, but data is readily available. You can get anything you want by the different databases that are accessible now and the different types of vendors you can use. So there is a lot of opportunity to get data without necessarily having to physically be in that country to get that particular set of insights. Whereas in sometimes the more developing countries, it is a bit more trickier, where you would need to talk to local partners and networks in order to get this kind of information. So from the channels, the competition, to positioning your product to customers, this is where you will be able to see, okay, does my product fit into this country? Will it work? Will it be? Can I partner with the right channels to capture sales? Do customers prefer purchasing these kind of products? And then also look at, once again, competition. That's strengths and weaknesses, and what they have to offer. Is it same as yours, or does your product have something different, a feature that it does not have? So then you look at what is in demand the most. What are the type of characteristics, values that people look at when they expect from a product in your category, and then look at also what type of sensitivity pricing is there, and whether price is something that you'll always have to compete on. Because you have to remember, when you go into a new country, you cannot expect the competitors or not to react. They will react. So you have to be ready for their reaction as well. So you are also going into an area where you might have to battle on price, which again, you need to consider whether it's the right way to go. Finally, there comes to embark. Now you have your information, you have your data points, you know everything that you have everything you need in order to take the next steps. So you can, from a product side, what your value proposition is and how you're going to develop your product, the place, what channels to use, and even more importantly, the location. So if you look at something like we have worked with clients who say, I want to go in the US. All right, that's fine. There are 50 states. Which state? Each state has its own unique, unique characteristics. You need to find which of that state in that particular country you might have to start off with. Then what is the ideal price and the strategy that you're going to employ? Is it going to be you're going to do the lowest price, mid price, and how are you going to communicate your product is worth that price? And then how are you going to get your customers? What's your plan for acquisition and retention? How are you going to promote your branding, your messaging? All in all, when you have this information, you can then decide what kind of market entry method works best. You can go from export, where you just, which most companies mostly try to go into, but that's a low risk and low control though. So as you go up that, you see from export to licensing to joint venture to mergers and acquisitions to greenfield, you lose your risk goes up and your control gets higher though. So export would be something like you would see something like most companies, SMEs, try to go up with a partner in a particular country and say, just distribute my products. And that works in some cases, but in a very slow pace. So you're not going to be able to maybe make the inroads that you want to. Then you have licensing. Now, if you look at Ministry of Crab, when I saw that model, they actually have two models where they also give a franchising fee, franchising in Thailand and in China, whereas the Maldives operation is controlled by them. So they have looked at a twofold type of approach, an export and a licensing type, setting up themselves and a licensing type. Then a joint venture, get a partner there, take a shareholding interest in the company or minority stake holding interest, and then introduce your products and work with them. Maybe leverage on their supply chains and their workforce. Then mergers and acquisitions. Now, even to this date, companies like Coca-Cola, Nestle, still with their brand presence, still because they know they don't have much time and they want to acquire companies and sell the products immediately. They don't just try and leverage on their old brands. So they always come up with new products and new things in order to get going. And then greenfield means starting from scratch. You go yourself, you invest everything in there, you take the entire risk, you have the entire control. So this is another method that people do. It is very challenging, but it is sometimes works out very well for a number of companies which have embarked on that kind of model. Finally, I'm going to end it before I hand over to my colleague Sanda. This is just for everybody who is on this webinar to reflect on: are you ready to go global? The first thing, timing. Is this the right time for you to go? Is it a time? Should you wait with the data? With the data that you obtain at this moment, is it worth staying off a bit, or should I go immediately? Those are decisions you need to make. And do you have a focused team? Now, when we talk to most companies and I talk to most CEOs, they have the ambition to go, but they always expect their team, while they're doing their day-to-day work, to also look at going international as well. And they just don't have the time to do that because there's so many things to focus on locally. So therefore, what may take just 1 month or 2 months with focus may take 6 to 7 months because they have to juggle both at the same time. Then, as I mentioned, market knowledge, getting that data, getting the information you need to make your decisions. Then innovate. When you get into a country, it may not be the same kind of product. As I mentioned, your USP may not reflect well over there. Are you able to change your product? Are you able to add something to it that maybe someone else in another country your target segment in particular would want? Again, that's something you have to see whether you're willing to do that kind of innovation. Then international network. If you have the network, if you have that base internationally, it's all the more makes it stronger case for you to look at going international, to going to different countries. And this may be a very important point, is make quick decisions. You cannot wait and see method. There have been a number of companies who wanted to wait and see even before COVID. Now they may not be able to go international because now they didn't start getting that foot in the door. So again, if you are going to go on this and you're going to establish yourself, you cannot go through a long bureaucratic process for approvals or to get things going in those countries. You need to make quick decisions, empower your people, and let that business flourish. So I'll end my part, and before I hand it over to Sanda, I'm going to be doing a quick poll. And in this poll, it will be, what market entry method do you prefer? So if you can answer this, and Sanda will take it on from there.
Thanks, Sean. we'll give you guys a couple of minutes to take the poll and then look at the answers that we see, discuss that, and then move on to the next question. Great. Sorry, Sean, have you handed over control to me? Sorry, guys, we're having a small technical difficulty with controlling the screen. We will move on as quickly as we can. Sean, you need to unshare your screen because it's not working. Control. Sure. Unshare yours, yeah.
What about the questions? Yeah.
Hello, participants. While we are sorting out matters to do with our screen, this might be an opportune moment for you to start putting your questions on the Q&A such that we can begin to reflect on them and make sure that they are curated when it comes to the panelists responding. Sandra, perhaps you can commence?
Yes, you can all see my screen, I hope. Sorry about that. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us on a Friday afternoon. Just to touch very briefly on what Sean said and to pick up from where he left off. So we talked very much about the importance of data, and we do like to practice what we preach. So what we thought was, at this unprecedented time, let us also look at how we can use data to make sense of what is happening in the world around us, especially for ourselves as well as our clients. What we were seeing at the when things were first unfolding, nobody really knew what was happening. There was a lot of information out there. There was also a lot of misinformation out there. So what we wanted to do was find a way that we could look at data in the most objective manner possible and use some indicators that could tell us how are things improving or are they worsening, so that we could make investment decisions better and our clients could make investment decisions better. So what we decided to do was we put together this the Stax Rebound Index, which is really looking at several different indicators. The first category is based on looking at the COVID-19 spread itself. As you can see, the index is made up of these three categories. And to look at, is the situation worsening? How many cases are happening per day? How many tests are being done? Because what we have found through a lot of our research is that the countries that are doing a lot more testing are actually doing much better in terms of tackling the virus, and also giving more confidence to the people, to the citizens of the country, that when more testing is happening, they can actually go about their normal days and resume their activities much faster. So what we also did was we need to balance that out with the economic indicators as well as consumer behavior indicators if we are actually going to figure out how quickly things are coming back to normal. And across different geographies, currently we are looking at 25 countries in this index. What we're looking at is various economic indicators such as unemployment, because that has been an issue throughout the world. With a few of those indicators, we're also looking at several real-time indicators, so things like foot traffic, so that we can see, even if curfew has been lifted, does that mean that people are actually out and about? Is there foot traffic at retail locations? Are flights picking back up? So these are some of the things that we wanted to look at. And this is an example that we're showing you how we are using data, because like I said, we try to practice what we preach, and we want to make sure that our clients are getting the best of this information as well. Because the good thing about using objective indicators is that you try to weed out as much of the misinformation as possible. And we've been doing this now for the past 7 or 8 weeks. This is what the score looks like this week. And you'll see that, it reflects heavily the countries that are doing really well in terms of tackling the pandemic are right on top. And of course, some of the countries that are struggling are towards the bottom. In terms of this, so it's really interesting to see how dynamic the situation is. If you looked at this a couple of weeks ago, you would have seen that countries like Italy and Spain were again towards the bottom of the table. But with the kind of the recovery that they've been seeing in the past few weeks, countries like Italy and Spain have moved up and they're reopening for business. So what this index is really trying to can tell us is basically, if you are operating in some of these geographies, then which ones should you be considering to go back into first, or if you need to reallocate some resources. If you have multiple locations that you're working in and your materials may be constrained at the moment, your human resource pool may be constrained at the moment, what are some of the geographies that you should be focusing your efforts on? Italy in particular, as you saw, the cases and deaths have been coming down, so they've been reopening. The biggest one, of course, for them is tourism, because it's summer season. And they very recently started opening back up to international tourists. So that will be a country that we should monitor very closely to see how tourists are thinking about traveling again. And that will be very important for Sri Lanka as well to see in terms of sentiment. And my colleague Divanka will talk a little bit more about tourism as we go along. But basically, this is kind of the phased roadmap that most countries are following, including Sri Lanka, to get back to normal. And what the index can tell you is, how quickly or slowly that is happening. But what we found is that, people are more worried actually now about economic concerns rather than health concerns. And this is across the globe. If you look at any kind of survey that is out there, you'll see that unemployment and uncertainty about the future in terms of economics is at the top of people's minds, even more than the impact of the coronavirus itself. So, let us pause here for a bit to actually take another quick poll to see, what's on your mind. Which of these things are really on top of mind for you now? Our curfew has been lifted for a little bit now. Are things kind of moving back to normal, or is it still economics that's at top of mind for you? Right. So this is in line with, globally what we have been seeing. And there is very good reason for this, of course, because all of the projections, forecasts are showing that what we will be seeing in the future is going to be, at least for the next 6 months, we are going to be in the middle of this downturn. And, the IMF has revised, about a -3% growth worldwide. And in terms of trade, this is where the biggest impact will be felt, because all countries have put down some kind of restriction. And Sri Lanka, of course, will be affected, especially in terms of tourism receipts. But what we find is, this is a global problem, and we are going to face it. It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. All we can do is really, again, monitor the data and react as quickly as possible, because no one really knows what's happening. Even the IMF, the ADB, they're making these based on the best data that they have, and we just have to keep monitoring and react and pivot quickly, as we will talk about. And I guess the worst part for a Sri Lankan looking at this, for Sri Lankan businesses, is that even though Sri Lanka has tackled the pandemic fairly successfully, at least so far, that our trade partners are some of the countries that are worst hit. If you remember the Stax Rebound Index table, the US, the UK, and India are languishing at the bottom of the table, and they have been for the past few weeks, and the foreseeable next few weeks also, things will not really change. So what we can do, though, is keep monitoring the situation. So for the US, for example, we have several clients who are working closely with the US. We have clients who are investing in the US, and we are monitoring for them state by state. Like Sean mentioned earlier, there's 50 states. They are all reacting differently. They're all progressing differently when they're trying to battle this pandemic. So what we've also done is we have a state Stax Rebound Index by state as well, where you can see, how are some of the states recovering? Are some of them recovering faster? And what you see in this matrix here is basically at the top right quadrant, you'll see the states that are doing well, both in terms of healthcare recovery, but also economic activity recovery. So if you are a company that has retail locations across the US, or if you're thinking of investing in the US, then these are some of the states that you need to look to first. Of course, there's a lot more that you need to go into. Like Sean mentioned, there's a lot of things that you need to look at before you invest. For example, the countries that are at the very top right here, you'll see states like Wyoming, Montana. They're not really known for their business or economic activity, and they're recovering faster because their population density is much lower. But you do find that, in this middle cluster here, that there are bigger states like Wisconsin, Rhode Island, Delaware, Maryland, with a lot more population who are actually recovering. And these may be areas that you could reallocate some resources to. So I will speed things up a little bit because we lost some time because of the technical difficulties. Let me leave you with this before I hand over to Tivanka to talk a little bit more about industries in terms of focus. We're not advocating for Huawei, or we're not advertising them. It's just that this image is really powerful. This is a fisherman in the Wagenya region in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is how they've been fishing for centuries. And this is in one of the most powerful cataracts in the Congo River. The water is rushing at about 28,000 cubic meters per second. They have to actually have really sharp focus in order to not to fall into the river and be swept away across the falls. And this is kind of where we are all at right now. Almost all businesses are at this critical juncture. We are in the middle of something that is beyond our control. It could sweep us away. And if we are not focused, we will not be able to persevere. So I will now hand over to Tivanka, who will start talking about, what are some of the focus areas that you could look at in order to see, identify any pockets of opportunity that you may be able to then persevere in.
Thanks, Sandha. Like Sandha explained, the pandemic, the effect of the pandemic is varying by country. And like you saw in the SRI index, the impact of it changes week over week, and based on that, how the countries are recovering are changing as well. One thing that is certain is that the impact of the pandemic is felt by everyone. No one is immune to it. It's just that the timeline of recovery might change based on the measures that you're taking. So the more stringent your measures are, the quicker rebound, but the harder the impact, while you may have a less stringent measures at the beginning, which will lessen the impact at the beginning, but will require a longer term recovery. And specifically, as both Sanda and Sean mentioned, due to the globalized nature of trade right now, one country's impact will be faced by other countries as well. So overall, this the pandemic has significantly impacted all sectors, but specifically accommodation and food services, which are your restaurants and hotels, manufacturing, wholesale and retail trade, and real estate are some of the biggest impacted sectors. And as ILO points out, we have almost 436 million enterprises worldwide in these 4 hardest hit sectors, and majority of them are small and medium enterprises as well as micro enterprises. So what we are seeing right now is most of these companies are facing difficulty, both in terms of lost orders, customers not coming in, and as well as difficulty in preserving cash as well. So there's a lot of issues most of the companies are facing right now. So looking at different economic outlooks for industry verticals, we categorize them into 6 broad buckets, looking at short term as well as how they will perform in the long term. So the first one is short term boost, long term stability, which means short term increase in demand due to the pandemic, and then gradual move towards stability as the pandemic passes. For example, like at home exercise equipment, skilled nursing facilities. The second one is short-term boost and long-term growth, which is sudden increase in demand due to the effect of the pandemic, and continued growth in the long term due to changes in consumer behavior during this period. So critical examples are teleconferencing, telehealth, and online learning platforms. The third one is short-term boost and long-term decline. Overall declining industries that saw a sudden increase in demand in the last few months, but will continue their decline as the pandemic passes. For example, personal computers and grocery retailers who have anyway been in a declining trend. The other one, the fourth one is actually the short-term hit and then a sudden uptick to release pent-up demand. And most of the industries that fall within this category are those that saw their activities halted in the short term, which will see an increase in demand as market opens up, and then in the long run will move towards stable demand. For example, legal services, elective health procedures are some of the sectors that we are seeing this in the global arena. The fifth one is short-term hit and long recovery arc, which is significant drop in demand as a result of the pandemic in the immediate term, however, and will take a long term to recover due to cautious consumer behavior. Key examples would be tourism and also restaurants as well. And the final one we categorize is short-term hit and continuing decline. So decline in demand driven by the pandemic and continued decline due to changes in consumer habits. So for example, traditional retailers or department stores where consumers got used to e-commerce and online purchases, who might continue doing that and reduce the actual foot traffic. I'll touch on that a bit in the next couple of slides. So like I mentioned, overall, we'll look at 4 to 5 different industries that are critical right now. The first one being retail. So one of the hardest hit sectors globally. What we're seeing is the pandemic has impacted the overall retail sector, where consumers have changed their buying patterns, moving more towards cautious spending in focusing on groceries as well as household items. And this will continue because consumers are right now worried about the economic growth, job cuts, wage cuts. So they are worried about spending extra money on other consumer products. So this will continue. But as time progresses and as they become more confident of the economic recovery, we might see more spending coming towards the other categories as well. And this is kind of evident in countries that are already ahead of the curve, for example, like in China and Korea, where we're seeing on top of these essentials, people now who are also willing to spend more money on, for example, personal care products, right? Along with the change in spending patterns, and like I mentioned before, a key change that we have noticed is the accelerated adoption of e-commerce across the globe, not only in the European and the North American regions, but also in the other regions as well. And this has become very critical now more than ever, where emerging markets are also coming into the e-commerce stage, and also allows small and medium enterprises to enter into other countries without actually having to be present in these countries. So it provides a platform for companies to expand into other regions. And interestingly, it's not only essentials that consumers are looking for through e-commerce right now. At the immediate term, more spending or more time was spent on looking for essential goods. Now it has expanded into adding other categories as well. For example, pet care products, toys, equipment, and other things. So what we can see is retail is also changing its paradigm, and e-commerce is becoming a lot more crucial for everyone, both in consumer side as well as the retailer side. And this is also similar in Sri Lanka as well, although we may not consider Sri Lanka as a e-commerce prominent country. It's actually not true. What we found in our internal survey was that over 85% of Sri Lankans who frequently access the internet have purchased products and services online. And it's not only within Colombo. 80% of those who use internet and live outstation purchase products, services online. And also people in the age category of 35 and 44 are also key customer segments for the e-commerce sector. And the spending capacity is also significant, where people spend between 5,000 to 10,000 on average. So we should consider that this is also critical for not just overseas, but also for the Sri Lankan market as well. So there's a quick poll just to get your viewpoints on that. Okay, due to time constraints, we'll move ahead with the poll, without the poll. So I'll quickly move on to the next industry that we're talking about, which is apparel, which is critical for the Sri Lankan market. So overall, apparel is another sector that has seen significant decline in this pandemic period because of store closures, consumers not spending enough money. So overall, what we're expecting is over 1/3 decrease in the overall market for fashion and luxury apparel in 2020. And from April to May alone, sales have decreased 60 to 70% worldwide. Overall, this hit on sales is estimated to be over 600 billion this year, majority coming from global fashion industry. And we've also already seen the impact of this in some prominent brands, where Macy's first quarter results were about 2 billion less than what they were last year, same period. Similarly, Gap's first quarter net sales were down 43%. So we're already seeing the impact of these challenges in prominent brands. And this has caused a ripple effect across the apparel value chain, where we are seeing a lot of cancellations in orders, as well as turnover for most of the apparel manufacturers. So we are seeing this impact in Sri Lanka as well, where from January to April, our apparel exports declined by about 28% compared to last year. And we are expecting a further decline of about 1.5 billion in losses in the next quarter. Although important to note that some of our apparel manufacturers were able to pivot in this situation and take on a lot of protective equipment, protective gear manufacturing during this period. But however, what we expect is this will not be sufficient to cover the gap in the long run. And this is a quick snapshot of how the apparel sector will recover. So what we're seeing is off-price and specialty retail stores will recover faster compared to the other categories of fast fashion and luxury. And department stores, like I said, will continue to see a decline as consumers move more towards the online channels. And also, there are a few quick trends that were defined based on COVID-19 and will impact the apparel industry. consumers' buying patterns have changed and their spending has changed. The channel that they prefer to purchase goods will change, moving more from a physical channel to a more online channel. Demand for sustainable and purposeful brands will increase as they understand the need for more ecological and sustainable brands. So all of these factors will impact the strategies the retail sector players have to take, and also which will impact our manufacturers here as well. So there will be change in distribution footprint, re-evaluating costs. So we will have to consider how we can align ourselves into the new cost structures and be more flexible and have better relationship with suppliers overall. And moving on to the next one, which is the tourism sector. Tourism has declined overall across the globe as well as in the APAC region. Quite a lot of flights have been canceled. Airlines are seeing a lot of decline, as well as also in the hotel and the restaurant industry. So across the board, all the countries are seeing a decrease in volume in tourists coming into the country. However, what we are seeing, interestingly, is that consumer sentiment is high among Americans and Europeans with regards to traveling in 2020 after the restrictions have been lifted. So by travel internationally, in Nepal, in the US states, 23% said they were willing to travel after the 30th day of restrictions being lifted, and 42% said they are willing to travel after the 60th day of restrictions. And similarly, those business travelers and budget travelers, they continue to be positive about travel in this year. And once restrictions are lifted, they are willing to go about the travels, although at a limited capacity in this year itself. And on top of that, the Asian country survey also showed that passengers are willing to move within the region. Mainly from Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, these countries, the individuals from these countries are willing to travel within the region in the next 3 months. However, the industry players will need to consider the new impacts of the COVID-19 to this situation. So consumers will now be looking for more enhanced safety precautions as well as cleaning precautions. And they will also be looking at discounts and flexibility in terms of booking so that they have a buffer if they are required to cancel their bookings. So Sri Lanka is looking at reopening the country for tourists in a couple of months, and there have been guidelines provided by the government in terms of what needs to get done for visa requirements as well as safety measures. On top of this, the hotels and travel-related companies will also need to consider how they can enhance safety and ensure the consumers that they can be safely be traveled around the country. Those are some of the sectors that saw a decline globally and regionally over the last 3 months, but there was also a sector that actually saw a growth as well. So this is mainly the technology sector. Some of the key subsectors that saw growth was telemedicine, teleconferencing, remote working, and distance learning. So I'll quickly go through these as well and share some insights that we have gathered. So with the quick shift towards remote working, the sudden shift, companies had to enable their employees to work remotely and provide the facilities required. So as you can see from this chart, about 85% of North Americans are now working remotely, and about APAC region, not including China, is about 65. So the important thing here is, although people move towards working remotely in a quick succession to adhere to the lockdown and social distancing norms, they are continuing to do it even after the restrictions are lifted. So it's something that has been continuing, and although people are now allowed to go back to work in most of these regions, they are still continuing to do this, which is creating opportunities for teleconferencing and remote working applications. And some of the biggest winners of these are Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So Zoom saw its daily meeting participants moving from about 10 million to about 300 million. Microsoft Teams saw it moving from 20 million daily active users to about 75 million. In China, where Zoom and Microsoft Teams are not very popular, you get WeChat and DingTalk, which also saw significant downloads in the first few months. So this, the next slide basically shows the impact the teleconferencing services like Zoom has had. Now it's valued more than the top 7 airlines in the world, and is now valued at around 60 billion in market cap. And like I mentioned before, what we are seeing is that even after the pandemic goes down and things ease up, now the companies have found that remote working can be taken on and continued. So there will be at least a portion of employees that are working remotely regardless of the situation. So about 74% of companies surveyed have mentioned that at least a certain portion of their employees will be working remotely throughout the period. So there's going to be opportunities for providers to continue to build these platforms, because security is one key concern that we have right now in terms of using these third-party platforms. So in terms of security applications, as well as other enhancement of AR and VR capabilities, will be critical in terms of growing these. Similarly, from mid-April, all of the most 191 countries had announced the lockdown measures and closed schools. So about 1.2 billion affected learners were there during this period, and schools and universities started using online education methods, either internal ones or third-party solutions to provide uninterrupted schooling services. And when we looked at US specifically, what you can see is that the searches for K-12 education platforms significantly increased right after the shelter-in-place notice was given, and similarly for the university platforms as well. And also on top of that, since now companies can't have in-person training sessions going on, most of the companies are moving towards platforms like Udemy, Udacity for online training for their employees, and individuals themselves, due to the higher job risk, are looking at upskilling themselves by enrolling in these platforms. So education service providers have also have the opportunity to enhance their services and have greater penetration in the future. Finally, I want to quickly talk about telemedicine in the technology sector. Telemedicine is another key one that has significantly increased during the pandemic, where patients were not willing to go into a hospital due to worrying that they will get the virus, and doctors also preferred them not coming and observing them from a distance. So telemedicine service providers had the opportunity to cater to this demand, and as you can see in the US, the online interest over time for telemedicine has increased significantly. Not only in the US, the Sri Lankan companies have also contributed during this period. So ODOC provided free consultations, e-channeling partnered with ODOC to provide audio consultations. And similarly, most of these telemedicine and telehealth companies came together to provide and prevent the spread of the virus across the country. And when we looked at in the US on our flash survey on how this will continue, so that's a critical question, whether it's just a situation that will continue during the pandemic and then stop. For our questions, the response was, no, this is going to continue even after the pandemic stops, because patients have now realized that there's actually benefit of doing this remotely rather than not being at the hospital. So overall, in terms of the knowledge and innovation, as well as the technology sector, what are the opportunities do we have? We can actually share our knowledge in terms of doctors, education providers as knowledge service outsourcing, which countries like China are doing right now. So China's telehealth companies have actually managed to onboard their doctors who are now serving patients across 30 different countries. So we can have similar services from Sri Lanka as well. On the technology front, telehealth platforms, video conferencing platforms, web portals, monitoring software platforms, security applications, all of these are right now interesting and are in demand. And we have also seen certain opportunities coming from countries like the United Kingdom, where they want to partner with Sri Lankan IT sector companies to develop education platforms as well as telehealth platforms targeting the patients and children. So looking at all of this, our international clients have also looked at these different industries, and they found different avenues to reposition their company in terms in these changing market conditions, right? So in terms of using data, they're very into using data in terms of decision making. So companies have, our clients have come to us in terms of to use data to reposition the business in across multiple international markets. So we are right now working with a food and beverage company to do a demand modeling to ensure that they have the right picture of how the market will evolve in the next couple of months immediately, as well as then after the pandemic subsides, how it will perform after that. And our clients are also looking at new business opportunities that arise due to the COVID-19 pandemic and expand their portfolios. So like I said before, security applications have become a critical issue on remote working. So one of our clients is actually now considering acquisition of a provider that gives security applications for email platforms. And also another client is looking at different business verticals for their existing portfolio companies, looking at horizontal and vertical expansion as well. And lastly, just talking about the Sri Lankan clients that we are working with, they're also looking in terms of pivoting and repositioning their businesses. Key themes that they're looking at are, one is focusing on local opportunities with import restrictions, currency exchange rate going up. Companies have now realized that there's an opportunity to import substitute, and we are seeing this in sectors like pharmaceuticals. The second one is escaping the commodity trap. Right now, most of our key trade markets have contracted, so demand from these countries are low. So what we need to focus on is moving away from a bit of looking at commodities per se and more in terms of services sector. And interesting to see some of our core apparel clients have also looked into this and are diversifying into different areas as well. And also lessening dependence on China, with global companies repositioning their supply chain and moving some manufacturing away from China. There's an opportunity for Sri Lankan companies to position ourselves in terms of a global supplier. And finally, in terms of driving on knowledge and innovation sector, like I said before, our Island of Ingenuity brand provides the support for the ICT BPM companies. And what we're seeing is some of these companies have actually understood that large-scale investment projects will be on hold for a while and are now pivoting to more application platform development, which are right now in demand. So those are some of the changes that we are seeing from our international and local clients as well. And now I'll hand it over to Rashid in terms of the next steps.
Thank you very much, Tivanka, for that presentation. I also take this opportunity to thank Sandamali and Sean, three very unique and three very diverse presentations. Three very diverse presentations, all of which obviously contribute to a very holistic understanding of SMEs getting into foreign markets and also strengthening current market holds. We have a few questions coming in. Prior to going into the questions, I would like to remind everyone that the recording of this presentation is on the Facebook page, on the UN Sri Lanka Facebook page. And should you like to have the presentation emailed to you, by all means, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You have our contact details having registered with us for this webinar. I would like to turn to Sean for the first question. I'm going to combine this question with a question that came on the chat box. So two questions, if I may, and if you could choose to respond to them together. How important is data or market intelligence to enter foreign markets? I'm going to combine this with a slightly different question which came on the chat box. How can we promote socially responsible consumer behavior? And how can SMEs drive this change, particularly in the context of COVID-19? Sean?
Thanks, Dr. Rashid, and for the question. So the first one is data important? So in the past, companies in Sri Lanka and mostly globally were able to enter into different markets because there was not as much choice as there is today. Access to information by consumers was limited as well, and they would ask maybe a neighbor or a friend or a family member what they were using and probably follow that brand or that particular product. But the way things are today, the competition intensity, the knowledge of consumers, they are as knowledgeable as anybody in the market. They probably sometimes are as knowledgeable as the people in the industry itself. It is not easy anymore to get into a country or into an international foreign market with just without any real information to differentiate yourself. You can. There has been, and it's been, a number of companies have done it. They have done it slowly. They sent samples of the products. The companies in those countries say yes, acceptable. We'll order a few more. But you may not be making the money and the real contribution towards your revenue as much as you wanted it to. You will have always be a very small percentage of your local revenue. So if you want to get into to make a presence known and to really get your product out there, data and information and getting that right insights is how you will really get there. To your second question, how can we promote more socially responsible SMEs? Now, one side, as I think a number of panelists I have heard said, it's education. That's the standard go-to answer. But I would also go this way. You have the opportunity to change SMEs. You as a consumer, you as an individual can do that. How? By pushing the companies that you endorse, where you buy from, to actually hold up to those standards that you find dear, which is important to you. Example, look at someone like Unilever's. In international markets, they have said they have their values are putting people first. They have and doing things responsibly. All their efforts, all their values, they have showcased it during this COVID pandemic. They have actually given over 100 million euros in soap, sanitary products to people, societies, and communities. They have lived up to the principles of their values. And look at things like British Telecom. Everyone is in Sri Lanka. What you saw for a while was every company slashing people's salaries. BT actually, for their non-management staff, increased salaries during this time. They had a salary increase, and that went with their value of putting people first. So in the same way, management is important. The education of the leaders of those, the management teams of those SMEs, yes, are extremely important to be educated and to follow those norms. As customers, now they are demanding companies to live up to those values. If you don't live up to the values, you're going to lose your customers. And that is a fact. People are more informed now. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but people now are really looking at every company right now to see how they're acting during this pandemic. And the companies that have reacted following their values are the ones who are benefiting the most and will continue to do so in the long run.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Sean. I think that was fairly comprehensive response, and I'm sure many companies that are looking to understand how their values are more relevant, particularly in a post-COVID-19 context, how they can begin to tangibly let it impact some of the work they do. This brings me back to a question that has come up based on something Sandamali said. She spoke of technology. She spoke of the relevance of technology or infusing technology in the work they do. But what of some of the other industries that are not very technology intensive? How do they pivot? Do they also look at using technology? If they're not using technology, could they make it a little bit more refined or focused? How is this philosophy applicable across the board? Sandamali?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks for that question. I think one thing that we know why we focus so much on technology is because, as all of the data showed, that's where some of the opportunity is. And of course, we're not expecting, that all companies will overnight be able to develop some of these capabilities or be able to pivot in terms of technology alone. One thing is that, all companies, whether they are technology, software, hardware companies or not, digitalization is a must. That's what these trends are showing, right? And that you cannot escape, unfortunately. And whether you are in manufacturing or in primary commodities, any of those, you are going to have to see how you can digitalize. One of the companies that we're currently working with is one of the oldest companies in Sri Lanka in primary commodities, and they are now being forced at this juncture because of this pandemic to look at ways that they can digitalize. And they're doing that. They're taking those steps that are necessary. So everyone will have to take some of those steps. But the other point also is that, you don't necessarily have to become a technology provider, but you do have to start thinking about how do you pivot, how do you use the capabilities that you currently have to maybe apply it in a different way. So can we start doing something different based on the skills or the resources and the capabilities that we have already developed? Especially, if you're an SME that's been around for a while, you're a successful company, your employees and you would have developed a skill set over time. And you may not think that that can be applied to technology, but you could pivot in other ways based on how the world is changing. So, one of the best examples that we often talk about, everyone knows what happened when technology disrupted Kodak, right? The digital camera came and film rolls went out of fashion. But both Kodak and Fujifilm, they both faced the same problem at the same time, right? But in 2012, Kodak was filing for bankruptcy, while Fujifilm was still making billions of dollars. How did they do that? They actually took a good, hard, honest look at themselves, at the capabilities that they have, and thought, how can we reapply this somewhere else based on how the world is changing? So what they realized was, our underlying capabilities actually, it's not just film rolls. We know chemicals. We know how to make, different technologies work in terms of chemical and aging. So the same technology they found that you can use to stop photographs from fading actually works on human skin. How brilliant is that? So they started doing cosmetics, and they are now bringing in most of their money, most of their revenue through anti-aging creams. So that's an example. Not every company will be able to pivot, that dramatically.
Absolutely.
But that's just an example, like really analyze yourselves. You have built up things over time. Don't be disheartened. Believe in yourselves,
Yeah, thanks very much, Sandaman. I think that's a very pertinent example. Nokia also comes to mind, who were not as agile as they should have been, and they lost out to the smartphone boom. I would like to, partly in response and to supplement what Sandamali said, I would like to remind all participants that this is a series of webinars, and we will have a webinar following this on digital integration, which would be quite relevant to SMEs looking to integrate digital technologies in their processes as well. Speaking of digital, I would like to now bring Tivanka in. Tivanka spoke extensively on the use of data and how data could underpin the kind of policy interventions that they make in companies. But lockdown started a few months ago, and since it started, the numbers have changed dramatically. Tivanka, things are changing so fast. How sustainable are policies based on data if data is changing so fast?
Yeah, thanks for that, Rashid. And I think I agree. It's a very good question, and I agree as well, because data is anyway changing very rapidly now, and since the pandemic, it has just gone into a very volatile state. So even, for example, when Sandha went through the index that we have, New Zealand, Denmark, Australia, these are some of the countries that are doing well right now. But second wave of infections can actually change things very quickly. So what we are saying is data is very volatile, and you need to make sure that you understand it. And you need to take it a step further to make sure that you can take long-term decisions as well. So for example, the index that we have right now will give you a good sense of how countries are recovering, where things are at this moment. But once you have that, you need to also look at how things will evolve in the future. So that's taking it into the next level of projections as well. So that is something that we are doing for one of our clients. So for this food and beverage manufacturer who wanted to enter into several international markets to diversify their risks, we are now doing a very detailed growth projection and a demand model where we use the index as the base to understand where the recoveries are happening faster, but also supplementing that with external factors like consumer confidence, change in behavior patterns, and developing multiple scenarios, which will actually position the client to understand how things will change and make the necessary changes to their strategies based on the final outcomes that are projected. So even when things are changing, they will have a sense of, okay, now this movement is going towards the next scenario that we have projected. So what are the next steps that we should be taking? So for any company that's looking at data, they shouldn't be looking at as this data will tell me A. It could be that there are multiple scenarios, and based on that, we need to have different answers for these and make sure that we are able to pivot based on the quick changes that we have right now.
Thanks very much, Tivanka. That's a really interesting response. We have run out of time. We have exceeded the time allocation that we had. But we will therefore try to wrap up. I remember a quote that Sean started with, where he quoted Peter Drucker. What came to mind at the time for me was a quote by a prominent economist of the time, Milton Friedman, who said that when a crisis hits, what gets picked up are the ideas that are lying around, which emphasizes that in the face of exigencies, in the face of future disasters that could take place, we must be ready with ideas that are lying around, which means ideas underpinned by data. Data therefore facilitates good innovative thoughts which could be picked up in the situation of an emergency. We understand very much how SMEs play a very critical role in the Sri Lankan economy, indeed in most global economies. The impacts of SMEs, unlike in some of the other sectors, have very direct impacts on families, livelihoods, and has a direct reflection on indicators such as children's access to education, access of families to nutrition and healthcare, and so on, particularly in women-led households whose incomes depends heavily on SMEs. We also learned through our poll today that people are more concerned of the economic impacts than health concerns of COVID-19. There is of course validity in this fear. We learned from the Ebola crisis that the socio-economic impacts of the virus were more damaging than the virus in itself, or the impacts of the health impacts of the virus in itself. Therefore, it is crucial to understand and emphasize that supporting SMEs have a very tangible impact on protecting livelihoods and empowering lives. Participants, panelists, concludes our first webinar on supporting SMEs, protecting livelihoods, co-organized by the UN in Sri Lanka, the United Nations Development Programme, and the UN Global Compact Network in Sri Lanka, with Stax partnering for today's webinar as our knowledge partner. Today's webinar focused, to reiterate, it focused on using data to understand dynamic global situations and positioning or repositioning businesses. I take this opportunity once more to thank Sean Silva, Sandamali Wijeratna, and Tivanka Bandara for their time and excellent presentations, which were very relevant, very pertinent, and certainly localized to the times that we are in. And to you, our participants who registered, took the time to be there with us today, and certainly for your valuable interventions and your questions. This is a series of webinars on support to SMEs, and do look out for the other webinars, the details of which will be disseminated shortly. Thank you very much once again. Have a very good weekend, and until next time, goodbye.